The evolution of the migrant crisis has truly been an absolute disaster, and that's just on the economic front. That doesn't even come down to the escalation of the criminality that we've seen start to proliferate in many different cities across the United States. And what we now see is that this degree of criminality is only ramping up in mass as Venezuelan gangs are now overtaking multiple different apartment complexes in different cities, akin to that of Aurora, Colorado, and Chicago, Illinois, and in doing so, also challenging the local gangs, ramping up the escalation of gang violence itself, creating a more violent environment for the people who lived in this area. So not only are they creating a more hectic situation for the civilians who live within this region that they are terrorizing, but they're also now extorting the people of the properties with which they are taking over. And if you are refusing the extortion, then you are then being beaten within an inch of your life, as we have now seen they have done to a landlord in an Aurora apartment complex. But you see, this isn't that big of an issue. And why might that be? Well, it's because if you're someone that doesn't have to deal with this, why should it matter? That might sound ridiculous to you, a sentient person who has a soul and actually thinks about things that other people have to go through, and you care about the plight and the suffering of others. But when you're someone who lives within the zeitgeist of the liberal bubble, it's almost inescapable because it is like a vortex. And because of that fact, those who exist within that framework of thought have no capacity to think outside the spectrum of allowable opinion that they have for so long existed within. And Martha Raddatz, speaking with J.D. Vance in a recent interview, truly highlights this better than anything I've seen in quite some time. And how is it that she does so? By stating that, well, you see, it's just a couple of apartment complexes that have been overtaken by Venezuelan gangs. It's not actually entire cities, as Donald Trump has stated, which he never actually ended up saying, as we know, the media once again being flamboyant when it comes to the fact of over-exaggerating a point which Donald Trump had made, which he himself already over-exaggerating so much that he says, clearly blowing out what he says to the nth degree. The media once again mischaracterizes him and makes him seem even more insane than he actually is, which truly is a feat. But nonetheless, the thing that I find most remarkable about this is what I've already stated, is the fact of being so completely removed from reality that you're going to sit there and make the argument, because you're so tribally entrenched within your own political bias, that, well, you see, it's not that bad because it's just a couple of apartment complexes. It's just a couple of properties, you see. It's just a few American citizens that are being terrorized. Meanwhile, the reason you're willing to make this justification is solely for the fact that it is your political party that has pushed for the standards that have allowed for something like this to unfurl. Truly and absolutely insane, but nonetheless, you don't have to take my words for it. Why don't you go ahead and watch this interaction of J.D. Vance speaking with Martha Raddatz on ABC, and you can go ahead and determine this for yourself.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border? Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting, because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
That truly is one of the most edifying clips I've seen come out of the corporate press in quite some time, because it truly highlights with a stunning degree of clarity how completely detached people like Martha Raddatz are from reality. And I would absolutely love to have people like this so consistently expose themselves in the fashion that we saw this woman do here, but we only get moments like this every once in a while for people to realize that those who are operating as the performative apparatchiks to speak truth to power, whether it be those within the political class or the supposed journalist class, well, we can see that in the end, they don't actually care about the suffering of the average individual, because they are not the average individual, especially with how it is that they see and classify themselves. They believe that they are better than you, and because of that, they can supersede the nature of your suffering and completely overstep it, just like they do all of the consistent homelessness and drug addicts that they see running rampant throughout the streets of the cities that they live within, but they'll never actually address that within the media that they work within. No, because that would defy the standards of the liberal ethos that has been purporting the narrative that we need to go ahead and be tolerant for so many of these people, because otherwise we're not operating as good people. But in the end, as we can see, if this is what it means to operate as a good person, then I believe that you are so far removed from an understanding of what that actually means that you very well may not actually even be living in reality, which, this being people who exist within the framework of the establishment media, we know that they are completely and totally detached from that reality. So what I would love to specifically go ahead and focus on here now would be the rise of Tren De Aragua through Venezuela and what had happened. So specifically, let's do a quick rundown. They started off in a Venezuelan prison and then ended up growing, proliferating, and expanding beyond the borders of this prison, in doing so becoming a massive international organization within Latin America, and specifically focus on trafficking what? People. Isn't that just remarkable? And as we see, with human trafficking being one of the major factors of people being ferried into the United States through the southern border, we can understand that Tren De Aragua would most certainly be making their way here to make a profit off of actions such as this, as they also assisted in ferrying people through Latin America to the southern border itself. So with this, we can realize what? That Tren De Aragua, well, they would be sanctioned by the Biden administration, because certainly that would absolutely be enough, but in the end, of course, as we know, it wasn't, and now we see them here. So let's go ahead now and jump in and see what's going on with this new Venezuelan gang that broke out of a prison that is now apparently spreading fear within the United States, as is stated here by the Associated Press, because yes, they are spreading fear in the United States to the point where they're now quite literally beating innocent Americans to the point of being a bloody pulp. Moving on now to CNN, we can see Biden administration designates dangerous Venezuelan gang as a transnational criminal organization. That's right. So you have a transnational criminal organization assisting in ferrying people illegally into the country, and not only that, exploiting them, making large amounts of profit, also trafficking drugs within the country itself, and we can also see now taking over properties in certain districts, like, I don't know, that being certain areas of Aurora, Colorado, or Chicago, Illinois, as we have seen the gang violence in Chicago versus these Venezuelan gangs ramp up in mass as of late. But jumping on now back to Aurora, here we can see from the New York Post, pictured Aurora apartment worker beaten to a pulp by Tren De Aragua as owners say migrant gang took over and tried to extort them. And then upon refusing this extortion, what happened? Well, this man who said no was quite literally beaten to a bloody pulp. Here we can see the proof of Tren De Aragua's violence in Aurora, Colorado is written in blood. A fed-up landlord in the Denver suburb has shared a bloody photo of one of his workers after the man was allegedly beaten to a pulp by members of the brutal Venezuelan prison gang for refusing to let them stay in a vacant apartment that they had taken over. Jumping down, we can see the Brooklyn-based company claimed that the gang effectively stole an entire apartment complex out from underneath it by threatening employees and trying to extort it for a cut of the rent in exchange for being allowed to keep operating in the properties. Here you can see the man himself, who was beaten mercilessly, and if you would like to actually see the footage, link in the description down below, you will be able to find the article from New York Post where they had the footage from the CCTV camera in the hallway that is showing him being maliciously beaten, and it is absolutely brutal. But of course, as we know, people like Martha Raddatz are claiming that, well, it's only a couple of apartment complexes, so are you telling me that people like this don't actually matter? Because I remember for so long, people like that within the progressive media, the liberal establishment class, consistently saying that if we didn't care about the plight of immigrants, if we didn't care about the plight of people of color, of those who are less fortunate than others, then what we're doing is operating as nothing more than the villains of the current era, that you're a racist, a xenophobe, and someone who is nothing more than a deplorable, as Hillary Clinton had referenced so many of those people who simply would not cast a ballot for her. Well, in the end, we can see that that's nothing more than performative outrage, and the suffering of American citizens quite literally doesn't matter to these people. Even if they were to look at this man in his eyes as he had blood pouring from his lips and drenching his shirt, it would mean absolutely nothing to them. Scrolling a little further down, we see local cops and the FBI were asked to help the extortion, or stop the extortion, perhaps, but they did not step in. In fact, refusing to do so, CBZ management said. So, effectively, yes, helping the extortion because they are not willing to actually step in and stop it, whether it was the local authorities or the federal authorities. Here we see gangs have taken control of several of our properties in Aurora, Colorado, the company wrote in a thread on X last week. In an attempt to discredit this fact for political purposes and avoid governmental accountability, some have spread false information about our situation. Isn't that amazing? So, gangs have overtaken numerous properties just in Aurora, Colorado itself, leaving many citizens that are that of, I don't know, American citizenship to be put at the behest of illegal migrant criminals, and it does not matter to anyone within the administration because to actually address this fact is to admit their failure and culpability in these actions. Moving on now, here we see from New York Post once again, Tren De Aragua comes for U.S. kids. Isn't that something? So we have a transnational criminal organization that is trafficking people coming for your children now, trying to, I don't know, enrope them into their criminal schemes. Here we can see a gang member accused of trying to recruit middle school students in Texas. A Tren De Aragua gang member has been busted after allegedly trying to recruit middle school students, according to cops, and experts warn that it's a sign the brutal Venezuelan gang has already infiltrated American schools. This happened in Houston, Texas, my hometown, you know, the human trafficking capital of the United States. Here we can see whatever the fuck his name is, Robertson Cova, 32, who has multiple arrests for theft since crossing the border illegally 2 years ago, is suspected of trying to make contact with students at Jane Long Academy in Las Americas in Houston. Federal law enforcement sources have told the Post. Cova, a Venezuelan migrant and confirmed member of Tren De Aragua, wanted to train the kids for a large-scale shoplifting ring across the city, authorities said. He targeted the young teens because they face few consequences when they are caught, the sources said. And not only that, but they are quite easy to extort as well. And if you would like to understand the totality of what this gang is and what it has become and how that has happened, I would recommend this article here from The Economist. Latin America's most powerful new gang built a human trafficking empire. It took advantage of millions of Venezuelan migrants, and I can guarantee you they have certainly taken advantage of millions of people that are flooding to the United States that they are most certainly exploiting and profiting off of, and in many ways, I would assume, stealing for their trafficking machinations. So let's go ahead, jump in, and see what just the beginning of this article has for us, and then we'll close it out. By the time Venezuela's army poured into Tocaron prison on September 20th, its target had already escaped. For more than a decade, Hector Guerrero Flores, better known as Nino Guerrero, ran Tren De Aragua, the country's largest gang, from his cell. Mr. Guerrero left behind a prison with all the hallmarks of a narco lair: restaurants and bars, a casino, a baseball ground, and even a small zoo. But Tren De Aragua is no drug gang. Its main earner is the movement of people. Mr. Guerrero built his empire by exploiting many of the nearly 8 million Venezuelans who left the country in the past decade as hyperinflation and dictatorship took hold. The syndicate has industrialized human trafficking on a scale not seen before in South America, according to a recent report by Insight Crime, a think tank in Washington, D.C. It is active in 6 countries with a network that stretches from the Caribbean to the Southern Cone. The article then goes on to explain how in 2011 the Venezuelan government made an exchange with Tren De Aragua to go ahead and make sure that they could lower the overall violence within the country itself, and in doing so they would make the exchange of what? Giving inmates the control of the actual prison itself, effectively making it nothing more than a cartel layer, with the Venezuelan government essentially doing nothing more than now negotiating with terrorists. We can see this goes all the way to then 2018, where Tren De Aragua has expanded so far beyond the borders of the standards of what we saw within that prison and have now escalated their control over Venezuelan society, that they are now controlling illegal borders with Colombia and making sure that they can make buku bucks off of the money that people are now having to pay to them to be ferried out of Venezuela because of the disastrous economic situation that these people are going through. So thus they are trying to migrate to places like Colombia and elsewhere. So thus we can see that the calamity which was visited upon Venezuela in many ways by the sanctions that were thrown at them by the United States, well, it leads to the fact of what we see now, with downstream consequences now affecting the United States itself. It very much mirrors the standards of blowback that we saw happen with the Middle East and then leading to the point of the travesty of 9/11, but alas, what we see is there will always be blowback for our actions throughout the world, and only through understanding this can we possibly hope to see that things like what we're dealing with now will hopefully come to an end in the future. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, and most importantly, my friends, please go out there and go tell someone you love them. Peace out.